In the vastness of space, where civilizations rise and fall like waves upon cosmic shores, there exists a universal truth that most species learn through bitter experience: never underestimate the seemingly weak. The Zephyrian Empire had conquered 14 star systems without a single defeat. Their advanced technology and overwhelming numbers had crushed every resistance they encountered. Planets surrendered after the first orbital bombardment. Entire species knelt before their might within days of first contact. When their scouts discovered a small blue planet in an unremarkable solar system, inhabited by a species that had barely achieved interplanetary travel, the Zephyrians expected another swift victory. These humans had primitive weapons, fractured governments, and a tendency towards self-destruction. Their military assessment concluded the conquest would take 72 hours at most. The Zephyrians had studied human history through intercepted transmissions. They saw creatures that surrendered in the face of superior force, that negotiated when cornered, that valued individual survival over collective resistance. What they failed to understand was that they were observing humans fighting other humans, beings who shared the same biological limitations, the same mortality, the same basic psychology. They had never seen humans fight for their very existence as a species. They had never witnessed what happens when humanity has nothing left to lose. They were about to learn why, in the deepest archives of galactic history, there existed whispered warnings about a phenomenon known as human desperation, warnings that most advanced civilizations dismissed as primitive superstition. This is the story of how the Zephyrian Empire discovered that some prey, when cornered, reveals itself to be the apex predator. The massive Zephyrian dreadnought Sovereign's Wrath materialized at the edge of the solar system with the characteristic blue flash of quantum fold technology. Its hull, stretching nearly 2 kilometers from bow to stern, gleamed with the dark metallic sheen that had become a harbinger of doom across 14 conquered star systems. Admiral Kethvar stood on the command bridge, his forearms clasped behind his chitinous back as he surveyed the primitive system through the ship's advanced sensors. "Report," he commanded in the clicking language of his species, his voice carrying the authority of countless victories. "System designated Sol 3 contains one inhabited planet, Admiral," reported Navigation Officer Zilda from her station. "Preliminary scans indicate a population of approximately 7 billion carbon-based lifeforms. Technology level appears to be early space age, with rudimentary chemical propulsion and basic orbital infrastructure." Kethvar's mandibles clicked in satisfaction. Another easy conquest for the Empire's expanding borders. His species had evolved from apex predators on a world where only the strongest survived, and their natural aggression had served them well in building the most feared military force in known space. The Zephyrians stood nearly 3 meters tall, with exoskeletons that could withstand small arms fire and reflexes that made them naturally superior soldiers. "Weapons analysis?" he inquired, already knowing the answer would be disappointing. Tactical Officer Mordek's voice carried barely concealed contempt. "Nuclear fission devices, kinetic projectiles, and chemical explosives comprise the bulk of their arsenals, Admiral. No energy shields detected. No plasma weaponry. No quantum disruptors. Their most advanced vessels appear to be small chemical-powered rockets incapable of interstellar travel." The Admiral's inner circle of officers clicked their mandibles in amusement. 14 conquests had taught them to expect more sophisticated defenses, but this species called humans appeared even more primitive than the rock-dwelling silicates of Kepler 442b, who had at least possessed crude energy weapons before their inevitable surrender. "Political structure?" Kethvar asked, moving through his standard assessment protocol. "Fractured into approximately 200 separate nation-states," reported Intelligence Officer Yvara. "Constant internal conflicts, competing ideologies, and resource disputes. No unified command structure. No planetary government. They appear to be as much a threat to themselves as any external force would be." This information pleased Kethvar immensely. Divided enemies were easily conquered. The Empire's standard strategy involved identifying the strongest faction and crushing it decisively. The remaining groups typically surrendered en masse rather than face the same fate. It had worked flawlessly on Zirion Prime, where the coalition of 5 had crumbled after the destruction of their primary industrial complex. It had worked on the ocean world of Tidalmar, where the Depths Collective had yielded after their capital city vanished beneath a sea of molten plasma. "Begin Phase 1 reconnaissance," he ordered. Deploy stealth probes to major population centers. I want detailed analysis of military capabilities, leadership structures, and population centers within 18 hours. Phase 2 bombardment will commence immediately afterward. As the crew busied themselves with their tasks, HFY studied the tactical displays showing Earth's surface. The planet appeared remarkably beautiful from space, with swirling white clouds above blue oceans and green-brown continents. Most worlds they conquered showed the scars of advanced civilization: orbital rings, planetary shields, artificial atmospheric processors. This world looked almost natural. The first wave of stealth probes launched from the Sovereign's Wrath, invisible to primitive radar systems and completely undetectable to the limited sensors these humans possessed. Each probe was equipped with advanced surveillance equipment capable of intercepting communications, analyzing weapons systems, and providing real-time intelligence on military movements. Within hours, the probes had infiltrated Earth's information networks through unsecured satellite communications. The ease of this penetration confirmed the Zephyrians' initial assessment: these humans possessed no meaningful cybersecurity, no quantum encryption, no neural firewall technology. Their digital infrastructure was as primitive as their physical weapons. Admiral Intelligence Officer Yvare reported, "We've accessed their global communication networks. The humans appear to be broadcasting their military capabilities openly on something they call the Internet. They're sharing detailed specifications of their weapons systems, troop movements, and strategic installations without any apparent security concerns." HFY's mandibles clicked in disbelief. They're broadcasting military intelligence to their own population? Yes, Admiral. It appears to be some form of public information sharing system. They've documented their entire military history, including tactical failures and strategic weaknesses. This level of operational security negligence exceeded even the most optimistic projections. The Empire's military analysts had prepared for weeks of intelligence gathering, electronic warfare, and counter-surveillance operations. Instead, these humans were essentially providing a complete blueprint for their own defeat. The probe data streamed across the bridge's tactical displays. Major military installations appeared on Earth's surface like glowing targets, completely unshielded and vulnerable to orbital bombardment. The largest concentrations appeared to be in regions designated as United States, Russia, China, and European Union. Each possessed nuclear weapons, but their delivery systems were laughably primitive chemical rockets that would take hours to reach orbital targets, if they could achieve sufficient velocity at all. Focus surveillance on their largest military installations, HFY commanded. I want detailed analysis of their command structures and response capabilities. The probes descended toward major cities and military bases, their sensors recording everything from troop positions to communication protocols. At the Pentagon, they observed humans in military uniforms moving with purpose through underground corridors, unaware that every conversation was being monitored and recorded. At NORAD, they watched human operators staring at primitive display screens, their early warning systems completely blind to the advanced stealth technology observing them. "Fascinating," murmured Science Officer Peltar as he analyzed the incoming data. Their military organization appears to be based on rigid hierarchical structures with clearly defined command chains. Eliminate the leadership, and the entire system should collapse within hours. At the Kremlin, Chinese military headquarters, and NATO command centers, the same pattern emerged. Human military forces operated with predictable organization charts, established protocols, and centralized decision-making processes. Their communications used encryption that the Empire's quantum computers could break in milliseconds. But, as the hours passed and more detailed intelligence flowed in, some of the junior officers began to notice anomalies in the data. "Admiral," reported Sub-Officer Krilven hesitantly, "the humans appear to possess an unusually detailed historical record of warfare. Their databases contain extensive documentation of military conflicts spanning several thousand years." HFY barely looked up from the tactical displays. Primitive species often glorify their violent past. "It means nothing. Sir, with respect, the sheer volume is unprecedented. They've documented conflicts involving millions of casualties, strategies that continued for decades, and weapons development that progressed through multiple technological revolutions." "Your point, Sub-Officer?" Krilven hesitated, unsure how to articulate his growing unease. They appear to have spent an unusual amount of their civilization's development focused on conflict, sir. The historical records show continuous warfare across multiple continents for thousands of years. Tactical Officer Mordek interjected dismissively. Which explains their fractured political structure and primitive technology. They've wasted resources on internal conflicts instead of advancing scientifically. But, Krillven continued studying the data, his unease growing. The humans had fought with stone weapons, then bronze, then iron, then gunpowder, then chemical explosives, then nuclear weapons. Each technological advancement had been immediately weaponized. They had fought in every conceivable environment: Arctic tundra, scorching deserts, dense jungles, open oceans, underground tunnels, and even in the vacuum of space during their limited orbital conflicts. Most concerning was the pattern of escalation in their conflicts. When faced with superior enemy forces, humans didn't surrender. They adapted. They innovated. They found ways to turn disadvantages into advantages. The probe data showed examples of smaller human forces defeating larger ones through tactics, terrain usage, and sheer persistence. Admiral, Krillven tried again, perhaps we should extend the reconnaissance phase. Their military history shows patterns that might. A sub-officer, Kethvar's voice carried a warning tone. Are you questioning standard Imperial protocol based on the primitive scratching of an inferior species? No, sir. I just think you think these creatures could pose a threat to the Empire's finest military forces? The Admiral's voice dripped with disdain. Look at their weapons, sub-officer. Look at their technology. They're firing chemical projectiles while we have plasma cannons. They're using radio waves while we have quantum communication. They can't even leave their own atmosphere in significant numbers. The bridge fell silent as Kethvar's authority reasserted itself. The Admiral was right, of course. No species armed with such primitive technology could threaten the Empire's military might. The historical data was merely the product of a species too barbaric to achieve peace, too primitive to develop beyond their violent nature. As night fell over Earth's primary continents, the surveillance probes transmitted their final reports. Every major military installation had been catalogued. Every government facility had been mapped. Every communication network had been compromised. The humans continued their daily routines, completely unaware that their world was being dissected by invisible observers preparing for conquest. Reconnaissance phase complete, Admiral, reported Navigation Officer Zilda. All primary targets identified and locked for bombardment. Secondary targets classified and prioritized. Human military assets appear to be concentrated in predictable patterns around population centers. Kethvar studied the holographic display showing Earth's surface dotted with targeting markers. Red icons marked high-priority military targets, nuclear weapon storage facilities, command centers, air defense installations. Yellow icons indicated secondary targets, major ports, industrial centers, communication hubs. Green icons marked population centers that would be spared initially to provide laborers for the Empire's industrial needs. Excellent work, the Admiral announced to his bridge crew. Begin Phase 2 in 12 hours. Standard orbital bombardment pattern: eliminate military targets first, then infrastructure, then broadcast surrender demands to remaining population centers. As the crew prepared for humanity's final night of independence, Kethvar retired to his private quarters to compose his victory report to the Imperial High Command. It would be brief, professional, and completely routine. Another primitive world brought under Imperial control, another species added to the Empire's growing collection of subjugated civilizations. He had no way of knowing that in those 12 hours, every major human government would detect the presence of his fleet. No way of knowing that intelligence agencies across Earth would pool their resources for the first time in history. No way of knowing that the very fractured nature of human civilization would prove to be its greatest strength when faced with extinction. Most importantly, he had no way of knowing that humans possessed one characteristic no other species in the galaxy had ever developed: the absolute refusal to surrender when faced with the extinction of their entire species. The Sovereign's wrath hung in space above Earth like a sword of judgment, its weapons charging for the bombardment that would begin the conquest of humanity. In the silence of the void, Admiral Kethvar reviewed his tactical plans one final time, confident that within 72 hours, this primitive blue world would join the Empire's collection of conquered territories. He was about to discover just how wrong an entire civilization could be about another species' capacity for resistance, adaptation, and sheer bloody-minded refusal to die quietly. The countdown to humanity's first interstellar war had begun, and neither side truly understood what they were about to unleash. The first plasma bolt from the Sovereign's wrath struck Cheyenne Mountain at exactly 3:47 GMT, vaporizing 300 meters of solid granite in a flash of superheated energy that could be seen from space. Admiral Kethvar watched the tactical display with satisfaction as the massive NORAD facility simply ceased to exist, replaced by a glowing crater that would cool for days. Primary target eliminated, reported Weapons Officer Telmar. No defensive response detected. Within minutes, similar strikes eliminated the Pentagon, the Kremlin's Defense Ministry, China's Central Military Commission headquarters, and NATO's Supreme Headquarters in Belgium. Each target vanished in identical flashes of light as plasma beams traveling at near light speed made mockery of Earth's most secure installations. Phase 2 proceeding according to schedule, Kethvar announced to his bridge crew. Begin elimination of nuclear storage facilities. But, as the Sovereign's wrath adjusted its firing position, something unexpected appeared on the sensor displays. Instead of the anticipated chaos and collapsed command structure, human military communications were increasing exponentially across the planet. Admiral, Intelligence Officer Yvare reported with confusion in her voice, human military activity is intensifying. Their communication networks show massive traffic increases rather than the expected disruption. Kethvar's mandibles clicked in mild irritation. Explain. Sir, our intelligence indicated that destroying their central command facilities would collapse their military organization. Instead, human forces appear to be adapting. Military units worldwide are maintaining operational status despite the elimination of their primary leadership. On the tactical display, the Admiral could see military bases across Earth suddenly coming alive with activity. Vehicle convoys were dispersing from major installations. Aircraft were taking off from airfields that should have been paralyzed by the loss of central command. Naval vessels were leaving port at unprecedented rates. How is this possible? Demanded Tactical Officer Mordek. We eliminated their command structure. Their military hierarchy has been decapitated. Yvare studied the incoming intelligence feeds with growing bewilderment. Sir, it appears that human military organization includes extensive redundancy. Local commanders are assuming authority independently. They seem to have predetermined protocols for loss of centralized command. This was unprecedented in the Empire's conquest experience. Every other species had possessed centralized command structures whose elimination resulted in immediate military collapse. The rock-dwelling silicates had surrendered within hours of losing their prime council. The aquatic Tidalmar had yielded immediately after their depth lords were eliminated. Continue bombardment, Kethvar ordered curtly. Target their nuclear storage facilities before they can be relocated. The Sovereign's wrath unleashed another salvo of plasma bolts toward known nuclear weapon storage sites. The facility beneath Malmstrom Air Force Base vanished in a pillar of fire. The submarine base at Kings Bay evaporated in a flash of superheated steam. Strategic missile silos across 3 continents disappeared one by one as the Empire's targeting systems worked through their predetermined list. But, for every target eliminated, human forces seemed to multiply their activity. Mobile missile launchers emerged from hidden locations that hadn't appeared in any intelligence assessment. Naval submarines that should have been in port were suddenly detected throughout the world's oceans. Military aircraft were taking off from civilian airports, highways, and improvised airstrips. Admiral, reported Sub-Officer Krill Ven, his voice tight with concern, human forces are not behaving according to our projections. They appear to be scattering rather than concentrating for surrender negotiations. From his position at the Central Command Console, Kethvar could see the tactical situation developing in ways that defied all previous conquest experience. Instead of massing their remaining forces for a final desperate defense, humans were dispersing across their entire planet. Military units were disappearing into urban areas, forests, mountainous terrain, and underground facilities that hadn't registered on the Empire's sensors. Sir, continued Krill then, their communication patterns suggest they're implementing something they call distributed command protocols. Individual units are operating independently while maintaining loose coordination through multiple communication networks. This level of military organization implied a sophistication that contradicted every assessment of human technology and culture. Species capable of such complex operational planning typically possessed advanced computing systems, quantum communication networks, and centuries of military evolution. Yet humans had achieved it with primitive radio technology and basic digital networks. Broadcast surrender demands, Kethvar ordered with growing irritation. Standard imperial terms. Total disarmament, surrender of all government officials, and immediate cessation of military activity. The surrender demand transmission burst across Earth's communication networks in dozens of human languages, simultaneously broadcast on radio, television, and internet systems. The message was clear and unambiguous: surrender immediately or face complete annihilation. The human response came within minutes, but not from any government official or military commander. Instead, every major communication network on Earth began broadcasting the same message in return. It appeared to be coming from ordinary humans, civilians, soldiers, political leaders, even children, all saying variations of the same thing: no. Not we surrender. Not we negotiate. Not we yield to superior force. Just simple, absolute, defiant rejection. Admiral Kethvar stood in stunned silence as his communications officer translated the flood of responses pouring in from Earth. Humans were broadcasting their refusal to surrender through every available medium. Television stations, radio networks, internet forums, even primitive cellular phone systems were carrying the same message of defiance. "This is impossible," muttered Tactical Officer Mordek. "No species refuses surrender terms when faced with complete military superiority." But the human responses kept coming. Military commanders who should have been dead were somehow still coordinating resistance from unknown locations. Government officials who had evacuated destroyed facilities were issuing statements of absolute defiance. Most incomprehensibly, civilian populations were openly supporting continued resistance despite witnessing the annihilation of their most secure military installations. "Sir," reported Yivare, her voice carrying unprecedented uncertainty, "the humans appear to have dispersed their entire civilization. We're detecting military activity in locations our reconnaissance never identified. Underground facilities, mobile command posts, even what appear to be weapons caches in civilian areas." Kethvar studied the incoming intelligence reports with growing confusion. Human military forces weren't just continuing to operate, they were multiplying. For every target the Empire eliminated, 2 new ones appeared on the sensors. Mobile missile launchers emerged from concealed positions. Infantry units materialized in urban areas. Naval vessels appeared in waters that had shown empty on all previous scans. "How many weapons do these creatures possess?" demanded the Admiral. "Sir, that's unclear. Our initial assessments may have been incomplete. Human society appears to be far more militarized than we understood. They seem to have weapons caches, trained personnel, and command structures that were completely hidden from our reconnaissance." The tactical display now showed Earth's surface crawling with military activity that defied all logical explanation. Instead of the concentrated defensive positions the Empire expected, human forces were spread across every continent, every major city, even remote wilderness areas that should have been strategically irrelevant. "Begin precision strikes on emerging targets," Kethvar ordered. "We'll eliminate their military capacity piece by piece." But, as the Sovereign's wrath began targeting the mobile human forces, new complications emerged. The mobile missile launchers weren't staying still long enough for effective targeting. Infantry units were disappearing into urban areas where orbital bombardment would require destroying entire cities. Naval vessels were using unpredictable movement patterns that made lock-on difficult. Most frustrating of all, human forces were beginning to demonstrate technological capabilities that hadn't appeared in any reconnaissance report. Surface-to-air missiles were achieving near-orbital altitudes, forcing the Sovereign's wrath to maintain higher defensive positions. Electronic warfare systems were jamming Imperial communications with surprising effectiveness. Cyber attacks were attempting to penetrate Zephyrian computer networks with primitive but persistent techniques. Sir, reported Navigation Officer Zilda, human forces have launched approximately 300 ballistic missiles toward our position. Kethvar's mandibles clicked dismissively. Primitive chemical rockets. Point defenses will eliminate them easily. The Sovereign's Wrath automated defense systems activated, filling space around the massive vessel with interceptor fire. The first wave of human missiles died in brilliant explosions as plasma bursts vaporized their primitive chemical warheads. The second wave suffered the same fate. And the third. But the fourth wave carried something different. Admiral. Weapons Officer Telmar's voice carried alarm. Detecting unusual radiation signatures from the incoming warheads. These aren't standard nuclear weapons. The sensors registered electromagnetic pulses of unprecedented intensity as modified human nuclear devices detonated in high atmosphere. Instead of attempting to damage the Zephyrian vessel directly, the humans had weaponized their nuclear arsenal to create massive electromagnetic disruptions. Minor system interference detected, reported the chief engineer. Backup systems compensating. But the electromagnetic assault was only the beginning. As the Sovereign's Wrath dealt with the nuclear EMP attacks, human forces worldwide launched their real counteroffensive. Every remaining military installation on Earth opened fire simultaneously, creating a synchronized barrage that overwhelmed the Empire's threat assessment systems. Thousands of missiles rose from concealed launchers across every continent. Surface-to-air systems that should have been destroyed days ago emerged from underground silos. Mobile artillery units that had scattered across 36 countries converged their fire on predetermined orbital coordinates. Most shocking of all, human forces were demonstrating tactical coordination that should have been impossible with their primitive communication systems. Units separated by thousands of kilometers were synchronizing their attacks with precision that rivaled the Empire's own military networks. How are they coordinating this? Demanded Kethvar as the tactical display showed synchronized human attacks occurring across the entire planet. Unknown, sir, replied Yvare. Their communication technology shouldn't allow this level of coordination. But they appear to be using multiple redundant networks, including systems we never identified during reconnaissance. The answer, which no Zephyrian could have anticipated, was that human military forces had spent decades preparing for exactly this scenario. Not alien invasion specifically, but the destruction of centralized command authority during nuclear warfare. Every major military on Earth possessed detailed protocols for operating independently while maintaining loose coordination through backup communication networks. More importantly, human civilization possessed something the Empire had never encountered: a population educated in military history, tactics, and technology. Millions of humans had served in armed forces. Tens of millions more had studied warfare through academic institutions, entertainment media, and personal interest. When faced with extinction, this knowledge became a distributed military academy that turned ordinary civilians into effective resistance fighters. Sir, reported Krill then, detecting unusual activity in human civilian areas. Large numbers of people are mobilizing. They appear to be forming organized groups with improvised weapons and communication systems. The sensor display showed human activity that defied all previous understanding of civilian behavior during conquest. Instead of fleeing or hiding, human civilians were congregating around improvised defensive positions. They were establishing communication networks, distributing supplies, and creating organized resistance cells. Civilians don't fight, muttered Tactical Officer Mordek. They surrender to avoid destruction. But, across Earth, humans were demonstrating that their entire civilization was far more militarized than any previous imperial assessment had indicated. Veterans of human conflicts, police officers, private security personnel, hunters, athletes, and even ordinary citizens with basic military training were transforming into an insurgent force numbering in the tens of millions. Admiral, Yvare's voice carried unprecedented concern: we may need to reassess our tactical approach. Human resistance is not following any known pattern of conquered civilization behavior. Kethvar studied the tactical displays with growing frustration. In less than 12 hours, what should have been a simple conquest had become a complex military engagement against an enemy that refused to behave according to any logical pattern. Human forces were multiplying instead of diminishing, coordinating instead of fragmenting, and fighting instead of surrendering. Most troubling of all, human technology was proving more capable than initial assessments had indicated. Their primitive weapons were being used with devastating effectiveness through superior tactics and coordination. Their communication networks were more resilient than Imperial intelligence had believed possible. Their military organization was more sophisticated than any pre-industrial civilization should have possessed. "Begin bombardment of major population centers," Kethvar ordered grimly. "If they won't surrender their military forces, we'll eliminate their civilian support base." But, as the Sovereign's wrath prepared to target major cities, new contacts appeared on the sensor displays. Human spacecraft, previously dismissed as primitive orbital platforms, were moving with sudden purpose. Satellites that should have been communications relays were maneuvering like weapons platforms. Space stations that appeared to be research facilities were deploying equipment that registered as potential threats. "Sir," reported Navigation Officer Zilda, "multiple human spacecraft approaching our position. Primitive chemical propulsion, but they're carrying what appear to be weapons systems." Kethvar looked at the tactical display with disbelief. Human spacecraft weren't capable of threatening Imperial vessels. Their chemical rockets could barely achieve orbital velocity, much less pose a threat to advanced military technology. But the approaching human vessels weren't trying to outfight the Sovereign's wrath through superior technology. They were implementing the same tactic humans had used throughout their military history when facing technologically superior enemies. They were getting close enough to make their primitive weapons effective. "Sir," Weapons Officer Telmar's voice carried alarm, "the human spacecraft are on collision courses. They appear to be ramming attacks." As Admiral Kethvar stared at the tactical display in stunned disbelief, he began to understand that the Empire had made a fundamental error in assessing human civilization. These weren't just primitive creatures with basic technology. They were a species that had evolved warfare into an art form, that had spent thousands of years learning to fight against superior enemies, and that possessed the most dangerous characteristic any species could develop: the absolute refusal to accept defeat. The battle for Earth had only just begun, and humanity was about to teach the Zephyrian Empire why the most dangerous enemy is the one that has nothing left to lose. The first human spacecraft to reach the Sovereign's wrath was the ISS supply vessel Endeavour, a converted cargo transport that should have been completely incapable of threatening an Imperial dreadnought. Its chemical engines were primitive, its hull was barely armored, and its crew of 6 humans had no formal military training beyond basic emergency protocols. What they did have was something Admiral Kethvar was only beginning to understand: the human capacity for innovation under extreme pressure. Commander Sarah Chen had watched the destruction of Earth's major military installations from her position aboard the International Space Station. As the senior officer of the only human facility in space, she had assumed command of humanity's orbital assets by default. Her orders were simple and had come from sources she couldn't verify: get close to the alien vessel and do whatever damage possible. "Control, this is Endeavour," she transmitted to the scattered network of ground stations still coordinating human resistance. "Beginning final approach to target. ETA 15 minutes. The response came from somewhere in the Australian outback, one of dozens of improvised communication centers that had replaced the destroyed command facilities. "Copy, Endeavour. Godspeed." Aboard the Sovereign's wrath, Weapons Officer Telmar tracked the approaching human vessel with barely concealed contempt. "Shall I eliminate the primitive craft, Admiral?" Kethvar studied the tactical display with growing confusion. The human spacecraft was following a trajectory that would bring it into direct contact with the Imperial dreadnought. Its primitive chemical engines were burning at maximum thrust, its course was unwavering, and its crew was maintaining communication silence. "They're attempting a ramming attack," he concluded with disbelief. "With a cargo vessel." "Orders, sir?" Kethvar hesitated. Something about this situation felt wrong. The humans had demonstrated surprising tactical coordination and military sophistication. This crude ramming attack seemed inconsistent with their previous behavior. "Hold fire. I want to study their tactics." As the Endeavour closed to within 10 kilometers, its true purpose became clear. The cargo vessel wasn't attempting to ram the Imperial dreadnought. It was deploying its cargo.
Sir! Navigation Officer Zilda's voice carried alarm.
The human vessel is releasing multiple objects. Small craft, debris, sir, they're scattering across our approach vector.
What Commander Chen had jettisoned wasn't cargo or debris.
It was every piece of equipment, spare parts, and scientific instruments aboard the International Space Station, each item carefully modified during the hours since the invasion began.
Solar panels had been converted into electromagnetic pulse generators. Communication equipment had been rigged as signal jammers.
Even the station's waste management systems had been repurposed into improvised weapons. But the most dangerous cargo the Endeavour carried was 6 human beings who understood exactly how much they had to lose. Initiating boarding protocols, Chen announced to her crew as the Endeavour fired its maneuvering thrusters and latched onto the Sovereign's Wrath using magnetic grapples originally designed for space station maintenance.
Boarding protocols? Tactical Officer Mordek stared at his instruments in disbelief. They're attempting to board an Imperial dreadnought with 6 crew members? What happened next defied every assumption the Zephyrians had made about human behavior.
Instead of attempting to penetrate the heavily armored hull of the dreadnought, the Endeavour crew began systematically destroying external sensor arrays, communication equipment, and defensive systems. They used tools and techniques that weren't military weapons but improvised solutions created by people who understood technology better than their primitive arsenal suggested.
Commander Chen's background was in aerospace engineering.
Her second-in-command was a materials scientist. Her crew included a computer programmer, a mechanical engineer, a medical doctor, and a physicist. When faced with the most advanced military technology in the galaxy, they didn't try to outfight it. They tried to understand it. Sir, reported the chief engineer from deep within the Sovereign's Wrath, we're experiencing systematic failures in external sensor networks. The humans appear to be sabotaging our equipment with improvised tools.
6 humans are sabotaging an Imperial dreadnought?
Yes, sir. They're using techniques we've never encountered.
Instead of trying to destroy our systems with weapons, they're reprogramming them. Modifying their function.
Turning our own technology against us. This was beyond unprecedented. No species in the Empire's conquest history had demonstrated the technological sophistication to modify Imperial equipment. The humans were doing it with improvised tools and basic scientific instruments. But the Endeavour crew was only the beginning. As Admiral Kethvar dealt with the boarding action, sensor displays across the bridge began registering new contacts throughout the solar system. Sir, reported Navigation Officer Zilda, detecting multiple spacecraft approaching from the asteroid belt.
Classification, unknown.
They appear to be improvised vessels using primitive propulsion systems. What the sensors were detecting was humanity's first successful implementation of distributed space-based warfare.
Mining companies had converted asteroid excavation equipment into kinetic weapons. Satellite manufacturers had transformed communication platforms into electromagnetic warfare systems.
Even civilian space enthusiasts had contributed by modifying privately owned spacecraft into reconnaissance and communication relay platforms. Dr. James Morrison floated in the pilot seat of the converted mining vessel Prospector, watching the Zephyrian dreadnought grow larger on his improvised sensor display. 3 days ago, he had been extracting platinum from near-Earth asteroids. Now he was commanding a hastily assembled fleet of 18 civilian spacecraft that had been converted into the most unconventional military force in human history.
All vessels, this is Prospector Actual, he transmitted to his improvised fleet. Target appears to be maintaining position. Execute Plan Prometheus on my mark.
Plan Prometheus was humanity's answer to the problem of fighting a technologically superior enemy with primitive weapons. Instead of trying to outfight the aliens, they would outthink them. Instead of using better technology, they would use technology in ways the aliens couldn't predict. The 18 converted spacecraft began their attack run not as a coordinated military formation, but as an apparently random collection of vessels approaching from multiple vectors. Each craft carried a different type of improvised weapon system, from electromagnetically accelerated asteroid fragments to modified nuclear reactors rigged as radiation bombs. But the most dangerous weapon they carried was human creativity applied to desperate circumstances.
Aboard the Sovereign's Wrath, Admiral Kefvar watched the approaching human fleet with growing concern.
Their spacecraft were primitive, but their tactics were sophisticated beyond anything his intelligence assessments had predicted. "Sir," reported Tactical Officer Mordek, "the human vessels are using unpredictable approach patterns. Our targeting systems are having difficulty achieving lock-on." This was because the human spacecraft weren't following any military doctrine the Zephyrians understood. They were using techniques developed for asteroid mining, satellite maintenance, and scientific research, repurposed for warfare in ways that Imperial tactical computers couldn't predict. The prospector opened fire first, launching a stream of metallic projectiles that had been harvested from asteroid mining operations and accelerated to extraordinary velocities using modified industrial equipment. The projectiles weren't sophisticated weapons, but they carried kinetic energy that could damage even Imperial armor.
"Minor hull damage reported," announced the chief engineer. "Multiple impacts on forward sections."
But the kinetic bombardment was only a distraction.
While Zephyrian point defenses focused on intercepting the metal projectiles, the other human vessels implemented their real attack.
Modified communication satellites began broadcasting electromagnetic interference across frequencies the aliens used for ship-to-ship coordination. Converted research probes deployed clouds of metallic chaff that confused Imperial sensors. Improvised nuclear devices detonated in precise patterns that created disruption fields around the Sovereign's wrath. Most effectively of all, the human spacecraft were sharing real-time tactical information through communication networks that the Zephyrians couldn't intercept or jam. The aliens had superior technology, but the humans had superior knowledge of their own improvised systems. "Sir," Weapons Officer Telmar reported with confusion, "the human vessels are coordinating their attacks using communication methods we can't identify. They appear to be sharing targeting data and tactical information through multiple redundant networks." What the Zephyrians couldn't understand was that human spacecraft were using everything from amateur radio frequencies to modified GPS satellites to laser communication systems originally designed for scientific research.
The humans weren't using military-grade communication equipment because they didn't have any.
They were using whatever worked.
Dr.
Morrison watched his improvised fleet execute textbook combined arms tactics using equipment that had never been designed for warfare.
The mining vessels provided kinetic bombardment. The communication satellites created electronic warfare effects.
The research probes gathered real-time intelligence.
The converted nuclear reactors, well, those were the real surprise.
Prometheus 7 *, you are cleared for reactor deployment, he transmitted to the converted nuclear research platform that had once powered a Mars colony simulation.
Copy, Prospector. Beginning reactor overload sequence.
What happened next demonstrated humanity's most dangerous characteristic, the willingness to sacrifice everything for victory.
Prometheus 7 accelerated directly toward the Sovereign's wrath while deliberately overloading its nuclear reactor. Instead of trying to survive the engagement, the human crew was turning their entire spacecraft into a guided nuclear weapon.
"Sir!"
Tactical Officer Mordek's voice carried alarm.
"The approaching human vessel is showing massive energy buildup. Their power plant appears to be destabilizing."
Admiral Kefvar stared at the tactical display in horror.
The humans were deliberately destroying their own spacecraft to damage his vessel. No rational species would sacrifice valuable resources and trained personnel in such a wasteful manner.
But humans weren't behaving rationally.
They were behaving like cornered animals that would rather die fighting than live in captivity. The nuclear detonation lit up space around the Sovereign's wrath with radiation that overwhelmed sensor systems and temporarily disabled defensive networks. It didn't destroy the Imperial dreadnought, but it created the opportunity for the other human vessels to press their attack.
"Multiple system failures reported," announced the chief engineer. "Sensor networks compromised. Defensive systems cycling offline for reset.
Navigation systems experiencing interference." In the chaos following the nuclear detonation, the remaining human spacecraft implemented tactics that no Imperial strategist could have predicted. They didn't try to destroy the Sovereign's wrath through superior firepower.
They tried to disable it through superior understanding of complex technological systems.
The converted research vessels deployed swarms of improvised electronic warfare devices that attached to the dreadnought's hull using magnetic grapples. The mining ships used industrial cutting tools to sever external communication arrays. The satellite platforms broadcast interference patterns that disrupted internal ship systems. Most effectively of all, the human spacecraft were being commanded by people who understood the fundamental weakness of all complex technology. The more advanced a system becomes, the more vulnerable it becomes to unexpected forms of attack. Dr. Morrison had spent 20 years designing space-based industrial systems. He understood the engineering principles that governed all spacecraft, regardless of how advanced their technology appeared.
Complex systems required predictable operating parameters.
Disrupt those parameters in unexpected ways, and even the most sophisticated technology would fail. All vessels, he transmitted to his scattered fleet, initiate Phase 2. Target their external power distribution networks. What the humans had discovered during their initial sabotage efforts was that Imperial technology, despite its sophistication, followed the same basic engineering principles as human equipment.
Power had to be distributed throughout the vessel. Communication signals had to travel through physical networks. Sensor systems required unobstructed operation. Attack those fundamental requirements in ways the aliens couldn't predict, and their technological superiority became irrelevant.
"Sir," the chief engineer reported with growing alarm, "the humans appear to be systematically targeting our infrastructure systems."
"They're not trying to destroy the ship. They're trying to disable it."
Admiral Kethvar stood in the command center of the most advanced military vessel in the galaxy and watched primitive human spacecraft reduce its operational capacity through tactics that defied every assumption about inferior civilizations.
But the most shocking realization was yet to come.
As his crew struggled to counter human sabotage efforts, sensor displays began registering activity throughout Earth's solar system that indicated the improvised spacefleet was only the beginning of humanity's response.
"Sir," reported Navigation Officer Zilda, detecting massive electromagnetic signatures from Earth's surface. "Multiple launch events in progress."
"Sir, they appear to be launching everything capable of achieving orbit." On the tactical display, Admiral Kethvar watched in stunned silence as humanity implemented the most desperate and ambitious military operation in their species' history, the complete militarization of their entire space-capable technology base. Every satellite in Earth orbit was being converted into a weapon platform. Every spacecraft capable of reaching space was being loaded with improvised weapons and launched toward the Imperial fleet. Every piece of space-based infrastructure was being repurposed for warfare. Most shocking of all, human civilian populations were supporting this effort with industrial coordination that rivaled the Empire's own military logistics.
Factories were retooling to produce space-based weapons. Universities were contributing scientific expertise.
Even individual civilians were donating resources and expertise to the war effort.
Admiral Kethvar realized with growing horror that he wasn't fighting a primitive civilization with basic technology.
He was fighting an entire species that had turned their collective knowledge, resources, and determination into the most effective asymmetric warfare campaign the galaxy had ever witnessed.
And they were just getting started.
Admiral Kethvar had conquered 14 star systems for the Zephyrian Empire, but none had prepared him for what was happening in Earth's solar system. As his damaged dreadnought struggled to maintain operational status against continued human sabotage, the scope of humanity's response began to reveal itself in ways that challenged everything the Empire believed about primitive civilizations. "Sir," reported Intelligence Officer Yivare, "we're detecting coordinated military activity on every continent simultaneously."
Human forces aren't concentrating for defense. They're everywhere.
The tactical display showed a planet-wide war machine that defied all previous understanding of pre-spaceflight civilizations. Instead of massing their forces for traditional defensive operations, humans had activated what appeared to be a distributed warfare system that encompassed their entire species.
In the underground facilities beneath Switzerland's CERN laboratory, Dr. Elena Vasquez was implementing humanity's most ambitious technological counterstrike.
The Large Hadron Collider, originally designed for particle physics research, was being converted into the most powerful electromagnetic pulse generator ever constructed. "Particle acceleration at maximum parameters," reported her assistant, Dr. Chenwei, who had been awake for 36 hours straight.
We're achieving energy levels that were theoretical until yesterday. Good, Vasquez replied grimly. The aliens have superior technology, but they still operate according to the same physical laws we do. Electromagnetic interference affects all electronic systems, regardless of how advanced they are. What the humans were attempting had never been tried before, using a particle accelerator as a planetary-scale weapon system. The energy requirements were enormous, the technical challenges were unprecedented, and the risk of catastrophic failure was nearly certain. But desperate circumstances had driven human scientific communities to attempt the impossible. Beginning charged particle beam generation, Vasquez announced to the international network of scientists coordinating the effort. Target the main alien vessel's position in 12 minutes. Meanwhile, in the Mojave Desert, the most extensive military engineering project in human history was entering its final phase. Every aerospace contractor, defense manufacturer, and civilian industrial facility in North America had been working around the clock to implement something called Project Lighthouse. General Patricia Martinez stood in the improvised command center, watching as hundreds of modified intercontinental ballistic missiles prepared for simultaneous launch. But these weren't nuclear weapons. They were carrying payloads that represented the combined scientific knowledge of human civilization. Status report on the warhead modifications, she requested from the chief engineer. All missiles loaded with quantum resonance devices, electromagnetic pulse generators, and kinetic penetrator packages, replied Dr. Robert Kim, who had been leading the weapons modification effort. We've also included atmospheric dispersal packages containing engineered nanoparticles designed to interfere with alien sensor systems. And the experimental warheads? Loaded on missiles 7 through 14. Antimatter containment systems, dimensional distortion generators, and temporal displacement devices. We don't know if any of them will work, but theoretical physics suggests they should have effects on any technology based on conventional understanding of spacetime. General Martinez nodded grimly. Project Lighthouse represented humanity's attempt to weaponize every scientific principle they understood. If primitive chemical rockets couldn't threaten alien technology through conventional warfare, perhaps they could succeed through unconventional application of advanced physics. Begin countdown sequence, she ordered. All missiles launch in 30 minutes. But even as North America prepared its desperate gambit, other continents were implementing their own contributions to humanity's war effort. In Russia, the massive nuclear arsenals weren't being prepared for traditional nuclear warfare. They were being modified for something far more dangerous. Dr. Alexei Petrov stood in the command center beneath the Ural Mountains, watching as technicians completed the most dangerous modification in weapons history. Instead of using nuclear devices as explosives, they were converting them into exotic matter generators. The theoretical basis is solid, he explained to the military officers observing the operation. If we can generate sufficient exotic matter in close proximity to the alien vessel, we can create localized distortions in spacetime that should disrupt any technology dependent on normal physics. And the risks? Asked Colonel Medvedev. Complete annihilation of everything within a 1,000-kilometer radius if the containment systems fail, Petrov replied matter-of-factly. But, since the alternative is the extinction of our species, the risk assessment favors attempting the experiment. This was the mentality that Admiral Kefvar was beginning to recognize as humanity's most dangerous characteristic. When faced with extinction, humans didn't surrender. They didn't negotiate. They attempted increasingly desperate and dangerous innovations that no rational species would consider. In orbit around Earth, the scale of human improvisation was becoming apparent as every piece of space-based technology was converted into weapons systems. The International Space Station had been disassembled to create dozens of smaller platforms armed with improvised weapons. Communications satellites had been reprogrammed as electromagnetic warfare platforms. Even weather monitoring systems were being used to coordinate atmospheric disturbance attacks. Commander Lisa Park floated in the makeshift command center of Freedom Station, a converted module from the ISS that now served as humanity's primary orbital command post. Around her, displays showed the status of hundreds of improvised spacecraft and weapons platforms throughout the solar system. Status report on the asteroid mining operation, she requested from Dr. Thompson, who was coordinating space-based resources. We've successfully converted 47 asteroid mining ships into kinetic bombardment platforms, he replied.
Each one is loaded with metallic asteroids accelerated to significant fractions of light speed. The aliens may have energy shields, but basic physics suggests that sufficient kinetic energy will overwhelm any defensive system.
And the Mars colony ships?
All 6 vessels are en route to Earth with their nuclear reactors rigged as improvised antimatter bombs.
ETA 72 hours.
Commander Park studied the tactical displays with a mixture of pride and horror. Humanity was implementing warfare on a scale that encompassed their entire solar system. Every human settlement, every space-based facility, every piece of technology capable of reaching orbit was being converted into weapons platforms. But the most effective human innovations weren't the large-scale engineering projects.
They were the small-scale adaptations that demonstrated humanity's capacity for creative problem-solving under extreme pressure.
In urban areas across Earth, civilian populations were implementing guerrilla warfare tactics that drew from thousands of years of military history. But, instead of using traditional guerrilla weapons, they were using advanced civilian technology repurposed for warfare. Dr. Sarah Kim crouched in the basement of MIT's computer science building, coordinating what might have been the most sophisticated cyber warfare campaign in galactic history. Around her, graduate students and professors worked with commercial computer equipment to implement attacks on alien technology using principles that no other species had ever developed.
We've successfully penetrated their primary communication networks, reported her assistant, Michael Zhang.
Their cybersecurity protocols are sophisticated, but they're designed to defend against attacks using similar technology. They're not prepared for attacks using quantum computing principles applied through classical hardware.
Good. Begin implementation of the virus package.
What the humans had discovered was that Imperial technology, despite its advancement, was vulnerable to cyber attacks that exploited the fundamental mathematics underlying all computing systems. The aliens had superior hardware and software, but they operated according to the same logical principles that governed all information processing. Attack those principles in unexpected ways, and even the most advanced alien computers could be compromised. Sir, Intelligence Officer Yvare reported to Admiral Kethvar with growing alarm, we're experiencing systematic cyber intrusions throughout our computer networks. The humans appear to be using attack methods we've never encountered.
Impossible. Their technology is primitive.
Yes, sir, but they're using primitive technology in ways our cybersecurity systems weren't designed to counter. They're exploiting mathematical principles that our programmers never considered as potential attack vectors. This was becoming the pattern of human resistance that Admiral Kethvar was slowly beginning to understand. Humans didn't defeat superior technology through superior resources. They defeated it through superior creativity applied to inferior resources. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. As the Sovereign's wrath struggled to maintain operational status against the escalating human attacks, sensor displays began registering energy signatures that defied all understanding of what pre-spaceflight civilization should possess. Sir, reported the chief engineer with profound confusion, we're detecting massive energy buildups across the human planet. Power levels that should be impossible with their technology base.
Explain.
Sir, they appear to be channeling the entire electrical output of their civilization into concentrated weapons systems. They're using their planetary power grid as a single massive weapon platform.
What Admiral Kethvar was witnessing was humanity's ultimate expression of total war, the conversion of their entire technological civilization into a single coordinated weapon system. Every power plant on Earth was contributing energy. Every industrial facility was producing weapons components. Every communication network was coordinating the war effort. Most incredibly, human civilian populations were supporting this effort with coordination that exceeded the capabilities of most military organizations the Empire had encountered. Sir, Navigation Officer Zilda reported, detecting multiple high-energy launches from the human planet. Massive electromagnetic signatures.
Sir, they're launching what appears to be concentrated energy weapons on a planetary scale. The first energy beam from Dr. Vasquez's modified particle accelerator struck the Sovereign's wrath with the force of a miniature star. It didn't penetrate Imperial armor, but it overloaded every electronic system within range. The second beam, fired from a modified nuclear fusion reactor in China, created electromagnetic effects that disrupted Imperial communication networks throughout the solar system. But these were merely the opening shots in humanity's most desperate gambit. As Admiral Kethvar watched in stunned amazement, every major human installation on Earth began firing simultaneously. Particle accelerators, nuclear reactors, experimental fusion devices, and improvised electromagnetic weapons created an energy barrage that lit up space around his vessel like a miniature galaxy. All systems experiencing massive interference, reported the chief engineer. Sir, we need to withdraw to a safer distance. Negative. We maintain position and continue the conquest. But, even as Admiral Kethvar refused to acknowledge the effectiveness of human resistance, his sensor displays were registering energy signatures that suggested humanity was just beginning to reveal their capabilities. Sir, reported Tactical Officer Mordek with undisguised alarm, the humans appear to be charging some kind of planetary weapon. Energy levels are approaching theoretical maximums for their technology base. What the sensors were detecting was humanity's final gambit, the conversion of their entire planet into a single massive weapon platform. Every nuclear reactor, every electrical grid, every industrial facility was being coordinated to produce the most concentrated energy discharge in human history. Sir, the chief engineer reported, if they achieve the energy levels our sensors are projecting, the electromagnetic pulse could disable our entire fleet. Admiral Kethvar stared at the tactical displays with the growing realization that the Empire had fundamentally misunderstood what kind of species they were fighting. These weren't primitive creatures with basic technology. They were apex predators who had spent their entire evolutionary history learning to fight enemies stronger, faster, and better equipped than themselves. And now they were applying that knowledge to interstellar warfare with results that defied every assumption about technological inferiority. All vessels, he transmitted to his fleet, prepare for immediate withdrawal to defensive positions. But, as the Sovereign's wrath began to retreat from Earth's orbital space, sensor displays registered something that made Admiral Kethvar question every assumption the Empire had ever made about primitive civilizations. Human spacecraft were pursuing his retreating vessels using propulsion systems that shouldn't have been possible with their technology base. Sir, reported Navigation Officer Zilda, detecting multiple human vessels approaching at velocities exceeding their chemical propulsion capabilities. Sir, they appear to have developed new propulsion technology during the engagement. Admiral Kethvar realized with growing horror that humanity wasn't just fighting with the technology they possessed when the invasion began. They were innovating new technology during the battle itself, adapting and improving their capabilities in real time as the engagement progressed. He was fighting a species that treated warfare as an evolutionary pressure that drove rapid technological advancement. And they were winning. The retreat of the Sovereign's wrath to the outer edge of Earth's solar system should have provided Admiral Kethvar with the opportunity to reassess his tactical situation and call for Imperial reinforcements. Instead, he found himself facing a scenario that challenged every assumption the Zephyrian Empire had ever made about warfare against primitive civilizations. Sir, reported Navigation Officer Zilda, human spacecraft are maintaining pursuit despite being outside their operational range. Their propulsion systems are operating beyond their documented capabilities. Admiral Kethvar studied the sensor displays with growing unease. The human spacecraft shouldn't have been capable of maintaining velocity at such distances from their home planet. Their chemical propulsion systems had strict fuel limitations, their life support systems weren't designed for extended operations, and their communication range should have been insufficient for coordinated attacks. Yet human forces were not only maintaining pursuit but were demonstrating technological capabilities that hadn't appeared in any reconnaissance assessment. Dr. Elizabeth Chen powered up the experimental fusion drive aboard the converted cargo vessel New Horizon, watching as her improvised propulsion system achieved thrust levels that violated every safety protocol in NASA's engineering handbook. Around her, a crew of volunteers who had never trained for space combat prepared weapons systems that had been theoretical concepts 72 hours ago. Fusion drive achieving 90% efficiency, reported her engineer, Dr. Marcus Webb, who had spent his career designing theoretical propulsion systems. We're actually exceeding our calculated performance parameters. How is that possible? Desperate circumstances tend to motivate creative problem solving, Webb replied with grim humor. Plus, when you're willing to ignore safety margins because extinction is the alternative, you discover that theoretical limitations are often more conservative than necessary. New Horizon Asterisk was one of 18 human spacecraft that had been converted into pursuit vessels using technology that shouldn't have existed. Experimental fusion drives, improvised antimatter containment systems, and theoretical propulsion concepts that had never been tested were being implemented by teams of scientists and engineers working with equipment that had been designed for completely different purposes. But the most dangerous modification wasn't technological. It was psychological. Dr. Chen transmitted Commander Rodriguez from the lead pursuit vessel, Indomitable were detecting massive energy signatures from the alien fleet. They appear to be preparing weapons systems for engagement. Understood. All vessels maintain pursuit trajectory. Execute Plan Omega if they achieve target lock. Plan Omega was humanity's answer to the question of how primitive spacecraft could threaten technologically superior enemies. They couldn't win through superior technology, but they could win through superior willingness to sacrifice everything for victory. Every human spacecraft in the pursuit fleet was equipped with a self-destruct system designed to convert their entire vessel into a guided weapon. If conventional attacks failed, they would ram Imperial ships using their fusion drives as improvised antimatter bombs. But, first, they would try something that no other species had ever attempted against Imperial forces. They would use the Empire's own technology against them. Sir, Intelligence Officer Yivare reported to Admiral Kethvar, the pursuing human vessels are broadcasting on Imperial communication frequencies. They appear to be attempting to communicate with us. Ignore them. Primitive species always attempt negotiation when they realize they're outmatched. But the human transmissions weren't surrender offers or negotiation attempts. They were something far more sophisticated and dangerous. Dr. Sarah Kim had spent the past 48 hours analyzing captured Imperial communication protocols from the sabotage operations aboard the Sovereign's Wrath. What she discovered was that Zephyrian technology, despite its sophistication, operated according to logical principles that could be understood and exploited by anyone with sufficient knowledge of computer science and information theory. Beginning transmission of the viral package, she announced to the team of computer scientists coordinating the cyber warfare campaign. If this works, we should be able to disrupt their entire fleet coordination system. What the humans were transmitting wasn't a communication. It was a computer virus designed specifically for Imperial technology, created by analyzing the logical structures underlying Zephyrian computing systems and exploiting vulnerabilities that the aliens had never considered. Sir, the chief engineer reported to Admiral Kethvar, we're experiencing system anomalies throughout the fleet. Multiple vessels reporting communication disruptions, navigation errors, and weapons system malfunctions. Cause? Unknown, sir. The malfunctions appear to be spreading through our communication networks. It's as if the human transmissions are somehow corrupting our computer systems. This was impossible. Imperial technology possessed cybersecurity systems that were designed to resist attacks from the most advanced civilizations in known space. No primitive species could penetrate Zephyrian computer networks using basic digital technology. But humans weren't using basic digital technology. They were using advanced understanding of information theory applied through primitive hardware in ways that Imperial programmers had never anticipated. Sir, reported Tactical Officer Mordek, multiple fleet units are reporting complete systems failures. We're losing communication with vessels throughout the formation. Admiral Kethvar watched in horror as his tactical display showed ship after ship going offline as human computer viruses spread through the Imperial communication networks. Vessels that should have been invulnerable to any attack from primitive civilizations were being systematically disabled by software attacks that exploited the fundamental logic underlying all computer systems. But the cyber warfare campaign was only the opening phase of humanity's final offensive. As Imperial ships struggled with systemic computer failures, human spacecraft began implementing the most audacious military strategy in galactic history. All vessels, transmitted Commander Rodriguez, begin boarding operations. Execute Protocol Prometheus. Protocol Prometheus was humanity's ultimate expression of asymmetric warfare. If they couldn't defeat Imperial technology through superior weapons, they would capture it through superior tactics and use it against its creators. The New Horizon latched onto the disabled Imperial cruiser Thunder of Victory using magnetic grapples originally designed for space station construction. Dr. Chen led her boarding party through the alien vessel's compromised airlocks using equipment that had been improvised from diving gear, industrial cutting tools, and life support systems designed for asteroid mining operations. Encounter resistance immediately upon entry, she transmitted to the coordination network. Alien crew members are approximately 3 meters tall, heavily armored, and extremely aggressive. However, they appear to be as surprised by our tactics as we expected. What followed was the most unconventional boarding action in military history. The humans weren't trying to capture the Imperial vessel through superior firepower. They were using industrial equipment, scientific instruments, and improvised tools to systematically disable alien technology from the inside. Dr. Webb used electromagnetic pulse generators to overload alien control systems. The ship's medic deployed aerosol anesthetics that had been designed for emergency medical procedures but proved effective against Zephyrian physiology. The communications specialist used modified computer equipment to take control of the ship's internal networks. Most effectively of all, the human boarding party possessed something that no Imperial strategist had ever anticipated: detailed knowledge of how to operate in hostile environments using minimal equipment. "Sir," the chief engineer reported from his position aboard the Thunder of Victory, "human intruders have somehow gained access to our primary computer systems. They're systematically taking control of ship functions." "How many humans?" "6, sir. They're using equipment we don't recognize to interface with our technology." Admiral Kethvar stared at the tactical display in disbelief. 6 humans were capturing an Imperial cruiser using improvised tools and techniques that defied all understanding of primitive warfare capabilities. But the capture of the Thunder of Victory was only the beginning. Throughout the Imperial fleet, human boarding parties were implementing the same tactics with devastating success. Instead of trying to destroy alien technology, they were capturing it and turning it against its creators. "Sir," reported Navigation Officer Zilda, "we've lost contact with 7 fleet units. All vessels report successful human boarding actions." "Sir, the humans appear to be capturing our ships faster than we can respond." What Admiral Kethvar was witnessing was the ultimate demonstration of humanity's most dangerous characteristic: the ability to learn and adapt during combat operations faster than any enemy could counter their innovations. Human boarding parties weren't just capturing Imperial vessels. They were studying alien technology, understanding its operational principles, and immediately implementing improvements that enhanced their combat effectiveness. Dr. Chen transmitted Dr. Morrison from aboard the captured Imperial destroyer Relentless Conquest. "We've successfully interfaced human computer systems with alien navigation networks. We're now capable of coordinating captured vessels using hybrid technology that combines our software with their hardware." "Excellent. Begin Phase 3 operations." Phase 3 was humanity's masterstroke, using captured Imperial technology to attack the remaining Zephyrian fleet with weapons and tactics that the aliens couldn't counter. The Thunder of Victory, now under human control, opened fire on its former fleetmates using Imperial plasma cannons operated by human crews who understood the weapons systems better than their original designers. The captured destroyer Relentless Conquest deployed energy shields that protected the human pursuit fleet from Imperial weapons fire. Most devastatingly of all, human cyber warfare specialists were using captured alien communication networks to spread computer viruses throughout the entire Imperial fleet. "Sir," the chief engineer reported with barely controlled panic, "human forces are using our own technology against us. They've somehow learned to operate Imperial equipment more effectively than our trained crews." "That's impossible." "Sir, with respect, everything these humans have accomplished should have been impossible. They're operating outside every assumption we've made about primitive civilizations." Admiral Kethvar stood in the command center of the most advanced military vessel in the galaxy and watched as primitive human forces systematically destroyed his fleet using tactics that no Imperial strategist could have anticipated. But the most shocking realization was yet to come. "Sir," reported Intelligence Officer Yvare, "we're receiving communication from Earth. The humans are, sir, they're offering us surrender terms." The transmission came from the improvised command center that had replaced Earth's destroyed military headquarters. General Martinez's voice carried the authority of a species that had just achieved the impossible.
This is General Patricia Martinez, representing the Unified Military Forces of Earth. The transmission began. To the commander of the alien fleet, your forces have been defeated.
Your ships have been captured. Your technology has been compromised. We offer you the opportunity to surrender unconditionally and submit to immediate departure from our solar system.
Admiral Kethvar listened to the surrender demands with growing horror.
He commanded the most feared military force in the galaxy, equipped with technology that should have been invincible against primitive weapons.
Yet somehow, a species that had never achieved interstellar travel was dictating surrender terms to the Zephyrian Empire.
Sir, continued the human transmission, we have analyzed your technology, reverse-engineered your weapons systems, and demonstrated our ability to operate your equipment more effectively than you can. We have also developed countermeasures for every weapon in your arsenal and defensive systems that can neutralize your offensive capabilities. Furthermore, we have documented evidence of your military organization, tactical capabilities, and strategic limitations. This information is being transmitted throughout our solar system and beyond. Any future alien invasion will face human forces that are prepared for your specific technological advantages and tactical approaches. Admiral Kethvar realized with growing dread that humanity had accomplished something no other species in galactic history had achieved. They had not only defeated a technologically superior enemy, but they had learned enough from the engagement to prevent similar defeats in the future. You have 12 hours to begin withdrawal from our solar system, the transmission concluded. Failure to comply will result in the systematic destruction of your remaining vessels using your own weapons systems operated by human crews. As Admiral Kethvar studied the tactical display showing the extent of his fleet's defeat, he began to understand why the deepest archives of galactic history contain warnings about human desperation that most advanced civilizations dismissed as primitive superstition.
Humans weren't just another species that could be conquered through superior technology and overwhelming force.
They were apex predators who had evolved the most dangerous characteristic any species could possess: the ability to transform any disadvantage into an advantage through superior adaptation and innovation. The Zephyrian Empire had made the fatal error of assuming that technological superiority guaranteed military victory. They had learned, at the cost of their entire invasion fleet, that some enemies become more dangerous the more pressure you apply to them.
Begin withdrawal operations, Admiral Kethvar ordered grimly.
Transmit our tactical analysis to Imperial Command.
Recommend that Sol 3 be designated as a restricted system. These, humans, are not suitable candidates for conquest.
As the battered remnants of the Imperial fleet began their retreat from Earth's solar system, Admiral Kethvar composed his report to the Zephyrian High Command. It would be the first conquest failure in Imperial history, and it would carry a warning that would echo through galactic civilization for centuries to come. Never underestimate a species that has spent its entire evolutionary history learning to fight enemies stronger than themselves. And never, under any circumstances, corner a human who has nothing left to lose. The humans had won their first interstellar war not through superior technology, but through superior will, creativity, and the absolute refusal to accept defeat. They had demonstrated that in the vast cosmos where civilizations rise and fall, the most dangerous species isn't always the one with the best weapons. Sometimes, it's the one that simply refuses to die. And, now, the galaxy would have to learn to coexist with a species that had proven definitively that being underestimated was the greatest tactical advantage any civilization could possess.